Jesus has just been arrested in the dead of night, and the men who promised to die for him are about to run for their lives. Everything you thought you knew about this story is about to feel brand new. This is the moment 7 seasons have been building toward, and Season 6 of The Chosen finally drops on November 15th, 2026, exclusively on Prime Video. The first 3 episodes hit all at once that day, with episodes 4, 5, and 6 rolling out weekly through December 6th, before the entire season closes out with a feature-length finale hitting theaters worldwide in spring 2027. This is not a typical release pattern for the show, and that alone tells you how massive this season really is. Series creator Dallas Jenkins has been calling Season 6 the biggest production they have ever attempted by a wide margin, and the filming schedule backs that up completely. While most seasons wrapped production in a matter of months, Season 6 took significantly longer, with shooting spanning from April through September of 2025, including location work in Goshen, Utah, and the Crucifixion sequences filmed on location in Matera, Italy, a city that has stood in for ancient Jerusalem in major biblical productions for decades. For the first time in the show's history, all 6 episodes plus the finale are being translated into dozens of languages simultaneously, instead of releasing in English first and adding subtitles later. That decision alone has added months to the production timeline, and Jenkins has openly admitted the visual effects team has been working nights and weekends just to get everything finished in time. Episode 1 picks up in the immediate aftermath of where Season 5 left off, and if you remember how that finale ended, you already know how heavy this opening is going to be. Jesus told Peter, James, and John that his hour had finally come, and then Judas arrived in the garden with armed guards sent by the religious authorities. The kiss happened. The arrest happened. And the screen cut to black before anyone could process what they had just witnessed. Season 6 picks up exactly there, in the raw, disorienting minutes right after Jesus is taken into custody. Dallas Jenkins has confirmed that the very first episode includes a scene showing the disciples walking away from the Garden of Gethsemane in the immediate shock of what just happened. And what makes this moment so powerful is that it is not something the Gospels spell out in detail. The Bible tells us the disciples scattered, but it does not tell us what they said to each other, how they processed the fear, or how shattered they must have felt in that exact moment. Jenkins and his writing team have taken that gap and filled it with what he describes as a plausible, grounded look at confusion, doubt, and grief among men who had just watched their entire world collapse in front of them. According to Jenkins, this sequence is meant to offer something deeply human, a lesson in where people turn when they are in the middle of suffering, sadness, and uncertainty they cannot control. What makes this opening hit even harder is the emotional whiplash baked into the writing itself. These are the same men who, just hours earlier, sat with Jesus at the table during the Last Supper, listening to him teach, watching him wash their feet, hearing him speak about betrayal without fully understanding what was coming. Now they are stumbling through the darkness outside Jerusalem, watching soldiers drag their teacher away, and realizing that nothing is going to be the same again. The Chosen has built its entire identity on slowing down and living inside these in-between moments, the spaces the Gospels skip over, and episode 1 of Season 6 appears to be doing exactly that with the immediate fallout of the arrest. Jenkins has also teased a separate clip from this stretch of the season, focused on Judas in the aftermath of the betrayal, and the timing of that moment matters enormously. Judas is not portrayed as a cartoon villain in this series. He has been built up across 5 seasons as a man wrestling with disillusionment, ambition, and a desperate need to control outcomes he could not understand. Watching that internal collapse begin to surface right after the betrayal sets up one of the most devastating arcs of the entire season, and the show has clearly chosen to let that weight breathe rather than rush past it. Jonathan Romy returns once again as Jesus, and this time the role demands something different from him entirely. Romy has spoken publicly about how emotionally and physically draining the crucifixion sequences were to film, and episode 1 is really the calm before that storm, the quiet, devastating setup before the trials begin. Shahar Isaac returns as Peter, a character whose journey through denial and guilt becomes one of the season's central threads starting almost immediately after this arrest. Paras Patel is back as Matthew, Elizabeth Tabish returns as Mary Magdalene, Noah James as Andrew, and George H. Xanthus as John. the disciple traditionally understood to be the one who stayed closest to Jesus through everything that follows. Vanessa Benavente returns as Mother Mary, and Luc Dimien steps back into the role of Judas for what is shaping up to be his most intense material yet. Richard Fancy returns as Caiaphas, Paul Benvictor as Herod, and Andrew James Allen as Pontius Pilate, three men whose decisions over the following hours will determine how this entire story plays out. The official synopsis for Season 6 makes the stakes painfully clear from the very first line. The hour has come. Before the sun sets, Jesus of Nazareth will be dead. That is not a teaser line meant to build mystery, because there is no mystery here. Everyone watching already knows where this road leads. The entire power of Episode 1 lies in forcing you to sit inside that dread anyway, watching people who do not yet know how the story ends try to make sense of a night that just shattered everything they believed in. What happens next inside that interrogation room is something The Chosen has been building towards since Season 1, and it is about to test every ounce of restraint Jonathan Roumie has as an actor. After the arrest in Gethsemane, Jesus is not taken straight to a formal trial. He is first dragged before Annas, the former high priest and father-in-law of Caiaphas, a man who still holds enormous influence over the Sanhedrin even though he no longer carries the official title. This detail matters because it reveals exactly how rigged the entire process is from the very start. Annas has no legal standing to conduct an official trial, yet he is the first person to interrogate Jesus, which tells you everything about how much political maneuvering is happening behind closed doors before any real legal proceeding even begins. The Gospel of John specifically records this private interrogation, and The Chosen has consistently shown a deep commitment to pulling these overlooked details out of Scripture and giving them full dramatic weight instead of skipping straight to the more famous Caiaphas trial. While this is happening, the disciples who have not scattered completely are left standing outside in the cold, tense and terrified, unsure whether they are about to be arrested next. This waiting period is exactly the kind of space The Chosen thrives in. It is not flashy. It is not a miracle or a sweeping crowd scene. It is just fear, uncertainty, and men who do not know if they are about to lose their own lives along with their teacher. That kind of quiet dread is far harder to film than a big action sequence, and it is exactly where this series has built its reputation over 5 seasons. Inside, Annas begins pressing Jesus about the nature of his teachings, trying to get him to incriminate himself or reveal something that can be twisted into a formal charge. According to the Gospel accounts, Jesus refuses to play along with this manipulation. He points out that he is taught openly in synagogues and in the temple courts where anyone could hear him, so there is nothing hidden that needs to be dragged out of him through an illegal nighttime interrogation. This response is not just clever, it is a direct challenge to the legitimacy of the entire process, and it is the kind of moment where Roumie's portrayal has consistently elevated this series above typical biblical dramatizations. He is not playing Jesus as passive or broken. He is playing him as someone who remains completely in control of himself even while every external circumstance is spiraling. That composure is exactly what seems to provoke the violence that follows. One of the guards in the room, frustrated or offended by what he interprets as disrespect toward Annas, strikes Jesus across the face. This moment is recorded in John's Gospel and has been anticipated by fans for a long time because it is one of the rawest and most uncomfortable beats in the entire arrest narrative. There is no defense, no retaliation, nothing but a man absorbing violence he does not deserve while remaining completely composed. The way this scene is handled will likely set the emotional tone for the rest of the trial sequence, because it establishes immediately that Jesus is going to face this entire ordeal without lashing out, without breaking character, and without giving his accusers the reaction they seem to be hoping for. Meanwhile, outside in that courtyard, Peter is going through his own private crisis, and this is where Season 6 starts laying the groundwork for one of the most heartbreaking arcs in the entire series. Peter has spent 5 seasons being built up as bold, loyal, and fiercely protective of Jesus, the disciple who drew a sword in the garden just hours earlier trying to defend him from arrest. Now he is standing in the shadows of a stranger's courtyard, recognized by people who start asking if he is one of Jesus' followers, and the fear in that moment is going to push him towards something he never thought he was capable of. The show has spent years developing Peter's character, his impulsiveness, his guilt over past failures, his desperate desire to prove his loyalty, which makes this looming moment of denial land with far more weight than it would in a story that treated Peter as a flat side character. What makes this stretch of episode 1 so effective from a structural standpoint is the way the show keeps cutting between two parallel pressure points happening at the exact same time. Inside, Jesus is being interrogated and physically struck while refusing to compromise his identity or his message. Outside, Peter is being questioned by ordinary people and is about to deny even knowing who Jesus is. Two men, two completely different responses to fear and pressure, happening simultaneously just feet apart from each other. That kind of parallel storytelling is something The Chosen has used effectively throughout its run, and putting it front and center in the season premiere signals that the writers know exactly how much emotional damage they can do by forcing viewers to watch both threads unfold side by side. By the time Jesus is finally led away from Annas to face Caiaphas and the full Sanhedrin, the episode has already established the emotional architecture for everything still to come. The composure under violence. The quiet collapse of a man who swore he would never abandon his teacher. The disciples scattered in confusion just outside the walls. None of this requires elaborate special effects or sweeping production value to land. It requires performances that understand restraint, and based on everything Jenkins and the cast have said about how difficult this season was to film, restraint appears to be exactly what they were chasing in every single one of these scenes. What happens next inside that council chamber is the single most theologically loaded moment in the entire series, and it is the line that seals Jesus' fate before Pilate ever lays eyes on him. Jesus is brought before Caiaphas and the full Sanhedrin, and this is where the show shifts from a private interrogation into something resembling an actual trial, except that calling it a trial is generous given how it unfolds. According to the gospel accounts, the religious leaders have already decided on the outcome before a single witness is called. What they need is not truth. They need testimony that sounds convincing enough to justify a death sentence, so the council brings in a string of witnesses against Jesus. The problem is that none of these accounts line up with each other. The stories contradict, the details shift, and under any legitimate legal standard the entire case should collapse right there. This detail is one of the most striking parts of the gospel narrative because it exposes the trial for exactly what it is, a process built around a predetermined conclusion rather than an honest search for facts. Caiaphas, growing visibly frustrated that the manufactured testimony is falling apart in real time, takes matters into his own hands and begins questioning Jesus directly. This is the moment the entire season has been building toward since the very first episode of the series. Caiaphas asks Jesus point-blank whether he is the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One. Up until this point across 5 seasons, Jesus has been remarkably careful about how openly he reveals his identity, often speaking in parables, often deflecting direct questions, often letting his actions speak louder than declarations. That caution disappears completely in this moment. Jesus answers directly, telling Caiaphas that he is, and that the council will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. This is not a vague or evasive answer. It is about as direct a claim to divinity as anything in the entire gospel narrative, and it is delivered at the exact moment when saying it out loud guarantees a death sentence. There is something almost unbearably weighty about watching a man choose total honesty in the one moment where silence or deflection could have saved his life. The reaction in the chamber is immediate and explosive. Caiaphas tears his own robes, a traditional expression of outrage and grief in Jewish custom, and declares that no further witnesses are even necessary because Jesus has just condemned himself out of his own mouth. The council votes, and Jesus is formally found guilty of blasphemy, a charge that under Jewish law of the time carried the death penalty. This verdict sets everything in motion for the rest of the day, because the council does not have the legal authority to carry out an execution themselves under Roman occupation. That single restriction is the reason the story has to move to Pilate at all, and it is one of the more fascinating pieces of historical and political context that The Chosen has consistently woven into its storytelling without ever feeling like a history lecture. While all of this is happening inside the chamber, Judas is somewhere else entirely, and his story reaches its most devastating point in this same stretch of episode 1. Having watched the consequences of his betrayal unfold in real time, having seen Jesus formally condemned, something inside Judas breaks completely. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Judas is overcome with remorse and goes to the chief priests and elders, telling them directly that he has sinned by betraying innocent blood. The religious leaders, having already gotten what they wanted from him, respond with what might be the coldest line in the entire narrative, essentially telling him that is his problem now, not theirs. Judas throws the 30 pieces of silver onto the temple floor, the same payment he accepted for identifying Jesus to the authorities, and walks away from a transaction that has utterly consumed him. What happens to Judas after this point is one of the most tragic endings in all of Scripture, and the way Luc Damien has portrayed this character's slow unraveling across 5 seasons makes this collapse feel earned rather than rushed. This is not a villain getting what he deserves. This is a man who convinced himself he was doing something necessary, something that might even force Jesus into finally claiming political power, and is now watching that justification crumble into nothing the moment he sees the actual cost of what he has done. With the council's verdict delivered and Judas's arc reaching its breaking point, Jesus is taken away one final time, this time toward Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor with the actual legal authority to order an execution. This transition marks a major shift in tone for the season. Everything up to this point has played out within Jewish religious and legal structures, governed by scripture, by Sanhedrin procedure, by centuries of tradition. The moment Jesus is handed over to Pilate, the story moves into the cold, bureaucratic machinery of the Roman Empire, a system that operates on entirely different rules, where political convenience and crowd control matter far more than religious law. Pilate is a character The Chosen has spent real time developing, portraying him not as a simple villain, but as a calculating political operator caught between Roman law, an angry religious establishment, and a crowd he cannot afford to let riot. How he handles a prisoner he privately suspects might actually be innocent is about to become one of the most psychologically complex threads of the entire season. By the end of this stretch in episode 1, the show has moved through 3 completely different trial settings, exposed a justice system rigged from the start, delivered the most direct declaration of identity Jesus makes in the entire series, and watched one of its most complicated characters reach a point of total collapse. And the day is still nowhere close to over. What happens between Pilate, Herod, and a screaming crowd over the next stretch of episode 1 is a masterclass in political cowardice, and it is about to show you just how far people will go to avoid taking responsibility for an innocent man's death. Jesus stands before Pontius Pilate, and almost immediately something becomes clear that makes this entire sequence so unsettling to watch. Pilate does not actually believe Jesus is guilty of anything that warrants execution. He questions him directly, asking if he is the king of the Jews, and Jesus gives an answer that neither confirms nor denies in the way Pilate wants, telling him essentially that those are Pilate's own words. This kind of response, calm, unshaken, almost unconcerned with the outcome, has consistently been one of the most striking parts of how this story gets told, because Jesus is not pleading for his life. He is not negotiating. He is simply existing in the moment with the same composure he showed in front of Annas and Caiaphas, and that composure seems to unsettle Pilate more than outright defiance would have. Pilate, sensing that Jesus is not going to back down or give him any legal justification for execution, and clearly not wanting to be the one who makes this call, looks for any way out of the decision entirely. That is when he sends Jesus to Herod Antipas, the ruler over Galilee, since Jesus technically falls under Herod's jurisdiction. This is a brilliant piece of political maneuvering on Pilate's part, shifting responsibility onto someone else rather than taking a stance either way. Herod, for his part, treats the entire encounter as entertainment rather than justice. He has heard stories about Jesus performing miracles and is hoping to see some kind of spectacle, essentially trying to turn a man's trial for his life into a sideshow. When Jesus refuses to perform on command, refuses to even respond to Herod's questions at all, Herod and his soldiers turn to mockery instead. They dress Jesus in a royal robe, an act meant to humiliate him by parodying the very claim to kingship he is being accused of, and send him back to Pilate having accomplished absolutely nothing except adding another layer of cruelty to an already brutal day. This sequence is darkly important because it shows yet another authority figure who has the power to stop this entire process and chooses instead to treat it as a joke. With Jesus sent back to him, Pilate is now completely out of options for passing the decision elsewhere, and this is where the story arrives at one of its most chilling moments. Following a Passover tradition where the Roman governor would release one prisoner chosen by the crowd as a gesture of goodwill, Pilate sees one last opportunity to avoid making the call himself. He presents the crowd with a choice between releasing Jesus or releasing Barabbas, a man described in the Gospels as a violent insurrectionist and convicted criminal. This is meant to be an easy decision, an obvious choice between an innocent teacher and a known criminal, and Pilate likely expects the crowd to choose mercy. Instead, stirred up by the religious leaders who have spent the entire night working to ensure this exact outcome, the crowd demands Barabbas be released and that Jesus be crucified. The sheer wrongness of this moment, watching a guilty man go free while an innocent one is condemned in his place, is one of the most quietly devastating beats in the entire gospel narrative, and the way this scene plays out will likely be one of the most talked about moments once the season actually releases. Pilate, faced with a crowd that is growing more agitated and a situation he can no longer control without risking a riot, performs an act that has become one of the most symbolically loaded gestures in all of Scripture. He calls for water and washes his hands in front of everyone, declaring that he is innocent of this man's blood and that the responsibility now falls on them. It is a hollow gesture, an attempt to absolve himself of a decision he is still the one making, and it captures something deeply human about how people try to distance themselves from choices they know are wrong while still going through with them anyway. Pilate has the actual legal authority to stop this. He has already said he finds no real guilt in Jesus. And yet, unwilling to risk his own political standing by defying an angry crowd, he gives the order anyway. What follows is a sequence that even longtime fans of the show have said they are bracing themselves for. Jesus is handed over to be flogged, a punishment so brutal under Roman law that prisoners often did not survive it before even reaching the cross. He is mocked further by soldiers, dressed again in a parody of royal garments, and fitted with a crown made of thorns pressed into his scalp, another act designed to humiliate him by mocking the very kingship he is being condemned for claiming. The cast has spoken about how physically and emotionally exhausting these scenes were to film, and based on everything Jenkins has said about the production taking far longer than any previous season, it is clear the team was not interested in softening any part of this for the sake of comfort. From there, Jesus is led out to begin carrying his own cross through the streets toward Golgotha, the site of the crucifixion, and this is where episode 1 appears to position its final, gut-wrenching note. The walk through Jerusalem is meant to be a public spectacle, a deliberate humiliation designed to serve as a warning to anyone else who might challenge Roman or religious authority. Crowds line the streets, some mourning, some mocking, and Jesus, already weakened from the flogging and the events of the entire sleepless night, begins to struggle under the weight of the cross. This is the exact point where the Gospels introduce Simon of Cyrene, a bystander pulled from the crowd and forced by Roman soldiers to help carry the cross the rest of the way. It is a small, almost incidental detail in Scripture, a random man caught up in someone else's tragedy, and yet it has become one of the most powerful symbols in the entire narrative, representing how ordinary people get pulled into carrying burdens that were never originally theirs. What happens at Golgotha is the moment this entire series has been building toward since its very first episode back in 2017, and nothing in 5 seasons has prepared viewers for how this season is choosing to handle it. When Jesus and the small group of soldiers finally arrive at Golgotha, also known as the place of the skull, the crowd thins out from the chaos of the streets into something quieter and far more intimate. According to the Gospel accounts, Jesus is offered wine mixed with myrrh before the crucifixion, a substance believed to dull pain, something close to a primitive sedative offered as a small mercy in the middle of unimaginable cruelty. Jesus refuses it. This detail matters more than it might seem on the surface, because it signals something about the choice being made in this moment. He is not interested in numbing himself to what is coming. He is choosing to face every second of it fully present. The soldiers then carry out the crucifixion itself, and this is the sequence the cast and crew have spoken about most openly as the hardest thing they have ever filmed, with multiple cast members describing the toll it took emotionally just to be present on that set day after day. 2 other men are crucified alongside Jesus that day, both convicted criminals, and the Gospel of Luke records a moment between them that has become one of the most quietly powerful exchanges in the entire crucifixion narrative. One of the criminals mocks Jesus, demanding that if he really is who he claims to be, he should save himself and them along with him. The other criminal rebukes him, acknowledging that he and the man next to him are being punished justly for actual crimes, while the man between them has done nothing wrong at all. He then turns to Jesus and simply asks to be remembered when Jesus comes into his kingdom. The response is one of the most hope-filled lines in all of Scripture. Jesus tells him that today he will be with him in paradise. In the middle of the most brutal moment imaginable, in the final hours of his own life, Jesus extends mercy to a stranger who has nothing left to offer him. There is no scene in this entire story that captures the core message of the series more completely than this one quiet exchange between 3 dying men. Standing near the cross, the show gathers together the people who refused to scatter when everyone else ran. John, traditionally understood to be the disciple who stayed closest through the entire ordeal, is there. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is there, watching her son die in a way no parent should ever have to witness. Mary Magdalene is there too, a character who has carried one of the most emotionally rich arcs across the entire series, from her introduction as a woman consumed by torment to becoming one of the most devoted witnesses to everything Jesus did and taught. Salome stands with them as well. None of these people can do anything to stop what is happening. All they can do is stay, and the show has built 5 full seasons of relationships and history specifically so that this moment of staying carries the maximum possible emotional weight. Cast members have openly admitted that very little acting was required for these scenes because the genuine exhaustion and grief of having spent months building toward this moment was simply present on their faces by the time cameras rolled. As the hours pass, the Gospel accounts describe darkness falling over the land for 3 hours in the middle of the day, an eerie, unnatural sign accompanying what is happening on that hill. Finally, Jesus speaks his last words, commending his spirit into the hands of his Father and declaring that it is finished. In that instant, according to Scripture, the earth shakes, and the curtain inside the temple, the massive veil separating the holiest part of the temple from everyone else, tears apart from top to bottom. A Roman centurion standing guard, watching everything that has just unfolded, reportedly declares that this man truly was the Son of God, a stunning admission from someone who represents the very empire that just carried out the execution. It is a moment of recognition arriving from the most unexpected place possible, a hardened Roman soldier acknowledging in a single sentence what the religious leaders spent the entire day refusing to see. This is where Episode 1 and the opening stretch of Season 6 is expected to land its full emotional weight, closing out the day that changed the entire trajectory of human history as told through the eyes of the people who lived through it firsthand. And while this moment marks the end of Jesus' earthly life within the story, it is far from the end of The Chosen itself. Season 7 is already confirmed and currently in production, picking up with the resurrection and everything that follows in the weeks after. So while Episode 1 of Season 6 closes one of the darkest chapters in the entire series, it is also setting the stage for the most hope-filled turn the show has ever attempted. What makes this entire premiere so powerful is not just the scale of the production, the international filming locations, the months of additional work poured into visual effects and translations, or even the performances from a cast that has clearly given everything they have to this material. It is the way the show has spent 5 full seasons building genuine emotional investment in these characters before ever asking viewers to watch them suffer through the hardest day imaginable. Peter's loyalty and fear, Judas's slow unraveling, Mary's quiet strength, John's steady presence. None of it would land the way it is about to land without everything that came before it. The Chosen has never been a show that simply retells a familiar story. It fills in the human moments Scripture leaves open, the conversations, the silences, the fear, and the doubt that make these ancient events feel immediate and real again. Episode 1 of Season 6 is shaping up to be the heaviest, most emotionally demanding chapter the series has ever produced, and based on everything the cast and crew have shared, it sounds like it was every bit as difficult to make as it will be to watch. If this breakdown helped you understand exactly what is coming when Season 6 premieres on November 15th, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next breakdown the moment new details drop. Drop a comment below and let me know which moment from Episode 1 you are most anticipating or most dreading, and let's talk about it together before this incredible season finally arrives.